Welcome back to TK Tennis. So this might be the most surprising and interesting string review I've ever done. And this is for the string of Grapplesnake Aspera Triplum. So this is a very rough string. It's a four-sided, is very rough and also has some indentations in it. And this string was sent to me by Grapplesnake. Normally I purchase my own strings, but in this case, I decided to email them and see if they wanted to provide me a set of this string. Grapplesnake is one of those unique boutique brands that I'm actually a big fan of the brand itself, especially the strings of Tour Sniper and Grapplesnake Tour M8. Tour Sniper is a fantastic alu power alternative that I used to use quite extensively, and Tour M8 is one of my top 5 favorite strings. It's an extremely comfortable string that's very precise and reliable, so I'm a big fan of Grapplesnake as a brand. But with that said, each review stands on its own merit. Now, a couple quick notes first about stringing with this particular string is some people have said this string really hurts because it's so rough and it's so edgy. I didn't find that to be the case, but I use the loop weave when I'm stringing, so it doesn't really affect my fingers very much. It's not really as rough as you think it is on your fingers, but if you're using a two-finger weave through the stringing machine, I can see where some stringers may find this to be a little bit rough on their hands. In terms of it sliding when you're weaving across the main strings, I didn't find that to be a big deal at all. It slides across each other from the mains and the crosses very easily, so that wasn't really a big deal. So let's get into the review and talk about the characteristics. Now, even if you're not going to use this string, I think this video is going to be very informative to a lot of people. So like I said, it's a four-sided abrasive string. It is a polyester string, and it comes in this really nice yellow color. It looked great in the racket, as you can see here on the video. It was really a nice looking string. It comes in the 1.19 millimeter, strung at my normal 50 pounds. So let's get into characteristics because it was really unique for a poly. So in terms of snapback, even though it slid across the string bed really nicely when you were stringing it, I found the snapback to be actually quite inconsistent, as you'll see here in this clip. The snapback was not as fast as a typical poly. It was sort of that nominal level. It would sometimes snap back and sometimes it wouldn't. So the snapback was sort of nominal and inconsistent, which is very unusual for a poly because most of the time polys snap back at least fast, if not hyper fast. And this did not do that. Now, in terms of grip and spin potential, because it's so rough and it's four-sided, you would think it would have a lot of grip and a lot of spin potential depending on your stroke path. And in that case, it does. It does seem to have a lot of grip. You can feel it, especially when it's new, gripping into the string bed or gripping into the ball. But the problem was because the snapback wasn't very good, it was inconsistent, which is a combination of your swing, snapback, and the grip of a string, and snapback being one of the biggest factors, if not by far the biggest factor in spin potential. If you don't have enough snapback, even if the string has a lot of grip, you won't get the spin potential. So while the grip was sort of normal to high, the spin potential was not what you would expect. Now moving on to power. Let's talk about the power because this is really unusual. As I always preach on my videos, when people talk about polys and some people say this poly has a lot more power than the other, that's nonsense. Power in terms of polys is very little variance between polys in terms of power characteristics. So at most I give polys, if they have a little extra pop, a normal plus, and if they have a little less pop, I give them a normal minus. Well, with this string, it actually has low power characteristic, which is the first time I've ever done that in a poly. It certainly is very muted and doesn't have a lot of pop. Now, is that because of the lack of snapback? I think that's probably the case as well. It just doesn't have enough responsiveness for what you're used to on most polys. So again, extremely unique. Now, how about accuracy? Well, I think this also comes back to snapback or the lack thereof. It's sort of inconsistent. It's sometimes reliable, or when the string was new, the accuracy was reliable like you'd expect on most polys. But it also became very inconsistent as soon as the poly wore in a little bit after an hour of play. The accuracy was less consistent than you'd expect. And I'm talking vertical accuracy, I'm talking lateral accuracy, all of the above you did not have the precision that I would expect to get from a poly. So that's why I have it sort of inconsistent, but yet it was reliable or semi-reliable when it was new. Then moving on to durability and longevity. Well, here is interesting as well. I can't speak to its overall durability because I was unable to play with this string until it broke. I played for about 4.5 hours with this string. The longevity, let's talk about longevity, was low. So its performance longevity, while it played fairly good the first hour or two, the longer you played with it, the less of performance longevity you got out of it. So I can't even grade durability because I wasn't going to play with the string for another 2, 3, 4 hours until it broke, because it just really became unplayable after a period of time. So longevity was low. Now let's talk about tension maintenance. Again, not the greatest, or by any means, it was poor, which is, you could talk about Alu Power having poor tension maintenance, or Head Hawk Touch having low tension maintenance. This is right up there with those, maybe even a little bit worse. I have given it a poor in terms of tension maintenance because, again, after about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, it got really mushy, it got soft, and it became mostly unplayable, which was really surprising and blew me away when I review so many polys to see something so different and not really in a good way. So how would I define the feel? Well, it has a very damp feel to it. So damp as in wet, and it feels like a little bit woody, like a damp wood, especially as it got 2 or 3 or 4 hours long, even though it also felt grippy. So it felt grippy, but it didn't give you the spin that you wanted, and yet it felt like soft wood. So I don't know if there's a lot of players that would like that particular feel. But of course, for me, as you can tell by this review, it certainly wasn't for me, and it became very frustrating to play with after about 4 or 5 hours, sort of like an old synthetic gut. Now let's talk about stiffness and feel. Well, initially when it was first strung, the stiffness was sort of on that slightly softer side. It wasn't extremely soft, like I talked about this soft wood feel, and it was initially a 4. But again, as the longevity sort of died and its performance died, the stiffness went all the way down to a 1 or a 2. So it ranges. When it was new, it was a 4. When it got old, it's sort of like a 1 out of 2 out of 10 and became very, very mushy. So let's talk about final grades. Well, I can't even really grade it. So this is meant to be a string for spin meisters, right? If you like to hit a lot of spin, you would want a 4-sided string most likely to help accentuate that spin and this rough coarseness to really help you. But I'm not a spin meister. I do hit with a fair amount of spin, normal sort of top spin shot, maybe a little bit higher in terms of the RPMs than most people, but by no means am I an aggressive top spin player. And in terms of spin meisters, what grade would I give it? It's hard to say. I'm not a spin meister, so I'm not even going to grade it when it comes to someone who hits with heavy aggressive topspin, because that's clearly who this was designed for. But I don't think it's probably going to hit the mark either, just because of the lack of snapback. So how about for average Joes? For average Joes, if you're not a spin meister, I'm going to give it a D. I just don't think it's going to appeal to a lot of people. In terms of value, it gets a C. It's about $18.50 for the US market. So who is it for? Well, you might be thinking not many people, and that's probably true, but this is just one reviewer's subjective opinion. So if I had to say who is it for, well, it's certainly for players who can easily generate their own pace, because this doesn't have a lot of energy return. So you have to have a lot of natural pace, and probably for heavy spin players who prefer highly muted strings and those who use power-oriented rackets, meaning stiff frames, right? Because you're not going to want something that's really soft and mushy in also a soft frame. So you're going to need a stiffer frame. And players who prefer muted, dampened rackets like the Head Gravity or the latest Yonex E-Zones will likely not want to use such a dampened string in combination with a dampened frame. Most players will prefer Tor Sniper or Tor M8. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's sort of what I feel about this particular string in the brand of Grapplesnake. I don't know what it is. Maybe they used the wrong polymer combinations of the two polymers that you use to make string. Maybe the additive wasn't right. But I don't think the issue is with the four-sidedness and its roughness. I think the issue is actually with how the string snaps back, and that's most likely due to the additives that are placed into the string or the combination of polymers that were used in the string in the first place. So that's my review for Grapplesnake Aspera Triplum. I hope that's informative. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next ACE. And please remember, if you like these videos and how I do these string reviews, comparing strings in a controlled environment in two different rackets, that allow me to have a little bit more depth to some of these string reviews. Again, thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.